Now that I've been testing out my iPhone 10, as a famous restaurant once said, I'm loving it. What is up guys, welcome back to another video. So it has been a few days since I got my iPhone 10. So this first video here is going to be all about the cameras. So the iPhone 10 has a beast camera setup. It essentially has 4 different cameras. So starting off with the rear cameras, we have dual 12 megapixel cameras. And for the first time in the iPhone, there's optical image stabilization in both the wide angle camera and the telephoto camera. For the wide angle camera, we have an f-stop 1.8 aperture. And for the telephoto camera, we have an f-stop 2.4 aperture. The dual camera setup lets you take portrait photos, and just like the iPhone 8 Plus, you can now do portrait lighting effects. As for video, the iPhone 10 can do up to 4K at 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, or 60 frames per second. Also on the rear cameras, you can do 1080p slow-mo at 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second. A few years ago, I bought a camera dedicated to just doing slow-mo video, and that camera couldn't even do 720p at either 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second. So the fact that we have a phone camera that can do up to 240 frames per second at 1080p, that is just freaking crazy. As for the front-facing camera, it is a 7 megapixel camera with an f-stop 2.2 aperture, and it does up to 1080p video. And of course with the iPhone 10 there is also a new infrared camera. The infrared camera allows for Face ID and Animoji, but along with those features, it's basically able to replicate the same sort of camera setup that's on the rear cameras. And what that means is that on the iPhone 10 you can now do portrait photos and portrait lighting effects. And that is crazy. So those are the specs of the camera setup on the iPhone 10. Now I can finally show you the cameras being put to work. So in my experience, I've only used just the normal sized iPhones. Before the iPhone 10, I had just the regular plain old iPhone 7, and before the iPhone 7, I had the regular iPhone 6. So up until this point, I've never got to use the dual camera setup on the iPhone. So for me, the first thing I wanted to do with the iPhone 10 was try out the portrait mode. And what I've learned is that portrait mode works. It works best under certain lighting conditions. Like portrait mode isn't something that you're going to be taking all of your pictures in. I feel like portrait mode and portrait lighting definitely shines more, literally, when it's used in proper lighting conditions. Here is a portrait photo of some clothes that I took. And I feel like this photo especially does a really good job at just showing how good the iPhone 10 cameras are. Not only did it do a really good job at making that depth of field effect, but the colors also really pop in this picture. All the colors in the clothes just look really vibrant. Sorry, I think they're doing yard work outside, so you might hear something in the background. And this last picture here just kind of shows how the lighting conditions can kind of affect the portrait photos. I went to go hang out with my friends last Friday, and this is a photo I took of my glass of Coke. And you can kind of tell here that the depth of field effect didn't work perfectly, but just keep in mind that this was in like a really dark environment. So for being in like really dark lighting conditions, I think the portrait mode actually did a pretty good job here. Anyway, those are a few photos I took with the rear cameras. This was one of the first tests I did of the portrait mode and portrait lighting effects with the front-facing camera. This photo was taken at night in a pretty dark environment, so I'm actually really surprised with how well it handled the portrait mode and portrait lighting effects. And keep in mind, this is with the front-facing camera, so that's just crazy. And here is, in my opinion, one of the better portrait mode photos I took with the front-facing camera. This was during the day with one of the windows open, so the light was shining right on my face, and so I definitely feel like the portrait mode shines more in this photo. So I mean, it's just crazy that, you know, the front-facing camera can do the same portrait effects as the rear-facing camera. As for video, I actually haven't really tested out the video yet. I'm actually getting ready to leave right now to go record some video tests out in a local park. So anyway, I'm going to shut up now here and give you a little montage of all of the camera tests I did with the new iPhone 10. Alright guys, so thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!